Welcome to the Futurebuild podcast, where we explore the people, ideas, and innovations shaping the future of the built environment. I'm your host, Martin Hearn, and today's guest is Neil Appleton, Knowledge Transfer Manager specialising in the built environment at Innovate UK Business Connect. He's a long-term champion of cross-sector innovation and someone who sits at the intersection of research, policy, and real-world application. Neil has helped businesses navigate the complex path from idea to impact through programs like the Knowledge Transfer Partnerships, Innovation Exchanges, and now SBEN, which is the Emergent Sustainable Built Environment Materials. In this episode, we explore what innovation truly means in practice, from SME journeys to systematic transformation. Neil shares how we can accelerate progress on some of our biggest challenges, from embedding circularity and sustainable approaches to decarbonising heat and energy. This is a conversation about innovation, collaboration, and the future of sustainable construction. Neil, an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
It's really good to be here and delighted to have been asked.
Thank you. We always start off by actually sort of turning your attention on yourself. Give us a little bit of an overview of your career and in particular, what got you into the built environment and the innovation space?
Well, it's quite a long career, as you can see by looking. So my early career was in civil engineering and mainstream construction, which came back from leaving school at 16. Ended up working for a structural steel fabricator and then found that actually I was slightly brighter than perhaps some of the other people there. Don't know if I'm doing a disservice. So I had the opportunity to do a degree. And studied civil engineering. And following on from that, I was really fortuitous in that I worked as the section lead engineer for a breakout from the larger organisation, and was given a massive amount of freedom with a safety net to explore new materials, new ways of thinking. The whole practice was structured on that. So this is going back into the 1980s, and we were running projects as management contracts, where we would work as the QS as well as the design authority and technical authority, utilising different materials. I was using polymers before they became widespread, which brought me into the world of composites because we had a particular thorny problem on a water treatment works. So excellent mentoring by the people there. I owe them so much. From that, I had a career change in the 90s that took me more into the supply chain, which was actually a company that made storage tanks in composite materials that I knew nothing about composites, and really took to what you could do with these materials and what you couldn't do, how they behaved. Took me into sort of deep levels of structural analysis, behavior, testing. How on earth do you make them in a reliable manner? And that has been a very interesting area to work in for a couple of decades. Working in SMEs, it took me into innovation quite deeply because we needed to improve how we manufactured for productivity, for better performance. And part of my career, I worked for a company using very advanced composites for rehabilitation of corroded steel structures in the offshore oil and gas industry and in defense and rail. So very widespread experience in that. And yeah, it's been a great ride. And that took me into the world of innovation through the High Value Manufacturing Catapult and now at Innovate UK Business Connect.
Brilliant. We're going to come on to your role in a minute, but I think I have to ask you the question, being at Innovate UK, you've mentioned innovation a lot there. Sort of, how do we define innovation? Because I think there's a lot of people sort of, lump it together with research and development or improvement, but I'd love to get your opinion on what is innovation? The big one.
Yeah, I was thinking about this on the train ride up here, and it's really difficult to give a definitive answer. You can come out with expressions like it's the development and adoption of new ideas or new ways of doing things, which is probably a fair descriptive. I think it distances itself from that need for continual improvement, which is your sort of Kaizen type approaches. They are incredibly necessary, but ultimately, when you take them to the limit, you sort of plateau in what you can accomplish further, whereas innovation gives you that step change, that real transformative difference to what you're doing, how you're doing it, so on and so forth. Research is more the academic piece, the understanding and the proof of concept in my head.
I think sometimes the built environment gives the perception that there isn't much innovation. People talk that we're still building homes like we were, hundreds of years ago. But I personally don't think. I think that it couldn't be further from the truth. I'd love to touch on maybe what you think innovation looks like in the built environment, especially in 2026.
I think you're right. There's been a lot of change. I think there's a lot of scope for more change. Quite often, innovation and adoption of innovation is driven by need, and you kind of need to recognize that need to actually take it on board. And some of the practices in construction have been the same for so many decades that their inefficiency, their problematic nature is perhaps lost. I look at fixing a steel rebar. It's taken as, well, it's a pain and that's what we do, without stepping back and saying, is there a better way of constructing? I think in 2026, it's a pretty short horizon. So I think what we're going to see in construction is, and it's a no-brainer, much more digital AI proliferation. We're seeing it in every walk of our life. We're going to see a lot more of it in construction, particularly around that making sense of data, improving how we do those, say, back office procedures. Not so much on the automation side, because that is harder to accomplish on a construction site. I think also in that innovation for 2026, we're going to see a alignment, strengthening, however you want to express it, of that marketplace for reused and repurposed goods. At the moment, it's quite fragmented. And it seems that every week another marketplace platform bobbles up. I think there's going to be some rationalization of that and expansion driven by the circular economy for growth plan that's due out any day.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there are definite sort of trends or legislation that triggers innovation. And I can't agree more with you around the circular economy and the reuse market. I think that's a really exciting area, and I'd love to come on to that in a bit more. But let's touch on that sort of that digital and AI, because there is a lot of talk about the built environment being extremely inefficient, and I think that's a massive opportunity for us to get more efficient. I'd love to just go into a bit more detail where you maybe see some of the big steps forward with that innovation.
We've been involved to a degree with our Bridge AI program, and a handy tip is watch that program, because there will be more funding down the line, we expect. A lot of the gains to date have been around programming, understanding program, and building up that case. I think there's potential for massive gains around safety. Once the industry can understand how they can safely share anonymized data so that vast data pool can be learned from, I think that's when a lot of the benefits will come through. Design is kind of a no-brainer. Anywhere where you've got a lot of prescriptive rote processes, AI lends itself extremely well, which should free up the designers to use the power of their brains and their imagination more.
Let's touch on maybe for those, I'm sure most people in the built environment are aware of Innovate UK. But I'd love you to give a bit of an overview of, what is Innovate UK? What is the department that you work for, in particular the Business Connect side? And what are some of the services you offer, and give us a real overview of it.
So I work for Innovate UK Business Connect. We're one of the strands, if you like, of the wider Innovate UK family. We don't control funding of organisations per se, although we do enable a lot of funding and add input to it. So our specific role is to build intelligence within the sectors that we work and to support across the supply chains in those sectors. So a typical week for me is regular meetings with large players in construction, whether it's major tier ones, major consultants. Equally, conversations with small innovators who are looking to progress something that they're developing, and perhaps researchers as well. And through that communication, be able to join up the dots between those small innovators who would struggle to get through the door at a major tier one, making the valid connections, which drives collaboration and helps innovation progress.
I'd love to probe on that a bit more because, and actually in partnership with Innovate UK, as a different department to yourself, we did the big retrofit challenge, which was a partnership with the NHDG, which is the National Home Decarbonisation Group, which is the tier one contractors. And they said the same. They said, we want to find the innovations that are going to make a real difference. And they're focusing on obviously decarb in the retrofit space. And then we wanted to connect them with all these SMEs that have, the solutions, or in their mind have the solutions. But there's something going wrong there. There's the want from the tier ones, and there's the sort of, we've got the solution. What's the barriers? Why aren't they connecting, or what's holding that back?
It's bizarre when you think about the effect of the internet and how easy it is to find people and do things. But in my career, even when I worked for a major organisation in Devonport, we had a novel technology, and part of my role was business development, finding those customers. And quite often you target someone, you mercilessly hunt them down and finally get that conversation with them, whether it's by strategic positioning in a queue at a conference or whatever. And you have a great conversation and they say, oh, crikey, Neil, I wish we'd met you 6 months ago. You could have solved this. And that is so true. It is really difficult for the small organisations to get that connection at the right time with the large organisation, and likewise for larger organisation to find the right smaller organisations. If they just open the door and say, here's my email, please contact me if you might have a solution to this, that they'll break the internet. So we kind of offer that gatekeeping service.
Let's touch on that a little bit then. So does Innovate UK Business Connect almost offer an aspect of validation? So, if I'm an SME and I'm a startup and I'm engaging with yourselves, are you almost pre-validating me to the tier one contractors? How does that door opening work?
There's a degree of validation. It's actually very, very difficult to properly validate a small SME. There's not that much information published on Companies House and so on. So there's a degree of making that introduction of, this company's got this technology, we've spoken to them, they seem to have got to this point. And there are caveats, but quite often our judgment is pretty good and sufficient for that tier one to say, yes, we'll have a chat, but in no way are we sort of validating the technology and so on and so forth. Okay.
Give us a glimpse of maybe, you mentioned there you're talking to the tier one contractors. What are they looking for at the moment? I know you mentioned reuse and circularity sort of a little while ago, but what are their key challenges or areas of innovation that they may be looking at the moment?
It varies by who you talk to be quite truthful. A lot of it is driven by productivity, inevitably, and rightly so, because every organisation exists to be profitable. If you're not profitable, then you start to cease to exist. Safety is a big driver, certainly with some of the organisations that we're working with, and with some organisations there is a genuine drive from the top down of we want to have less harm to the environment, less harm to people, better socio-economical good. It's a genuine feeling that comes through, which makes them very easy for us to deal with. It aligns nicely with where we work.
Yeah. And I think hand in hand sometimes when people talk about innovation, they also talk about risk and managing risk as well. That seems to be a barrier. And when I talk to a lot of the SMEs, they talk about maybe the complexity or cost of going through testing and accreditation as well. Do you see this as a sort of one of the major barriers to maybe the adoption of innovation?
Yeah, I mean, risk is a big topic and we need to probably unpick it a little bit.
It's probably a whole podcast on that.
Yeah, in terms of the piece around third-party certification, which is very much a necessary part of bringing new product or material to market. We're just winding up a webinar series specifically to try and help inform that innovative SME community about this. That's an available resource on our
we'll
web
put a link
page.
to that in this podcast.
Absolutely. That has been a real eye-opener for myself. But equally, it kind of shows the route that you need to go through. I think part of the reality check is if you're an SME looking to enter aerospace, you probably go in with eyes wide open of, we're going to need a lot of testing. I think with construction, it's perceived as, well, actually, I can make this stuff and I can put together an extension at home from it. The reality is with building safety regs, that you've got to go through third-party certification. You need to make sure that you've got a safe, demonstrably performing product to take to market to mitigate that risk for the adopters and for the insurers. Now, there's ways of navigating that, and there's an efficient route and there's an inefficient route, undoubtedly. But I do feel that perhaps certain SMEs think, the focus is on making the thing and not necessarily on how do we get that over that final stage into market.
I think we see quite a lot, especially with a lot of the fabric solutions, that they go down the sort of almost garden building route in a first instance, or small extensions rather than because you need, obviously, to get into retrofit, you need things like PAS accreditation and that side, which is another step up, isn't it, on that scale? And I imagine a good route of collaboration, and that's a bit I want to touch on at the moment, is really maybe what happens on a lot of sort of trial projects as well. I know that's quite a big area in the built environment, that a lot of whether it's architects or contractors do want to almost take on sort of and trial a project or trial a product on a particular project first as well.
Yeah, they are excellent clients and specifiers where they will say, actually, we will underwrite this risk. We will take on this risk because this is the right thing to do. And they're fantastic to see, and they are absolute gold dust for early deployment. There's certainly been projects in London, in Camden, where they've taken the excavated clay out of the basement. They've processed that into building blocks and brought the building blocks on site and built internal walls using and it's not a fired process. It's not a high energy process like brick making. It's a low temperature cure. Fantastic technologies like that, which have got, arguably, it's old school technology, but brought into the modern age. But you need that client specifier fully bought into it, and you need a contractor that's lined up to it as well.
And that comes down to collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. There's got to be that shared vision, that top down, this is what we want. And I often reflect on, where do innovations fail to stick during that deployment phase? And quite often it's the nature of the construction supply chain. It's a very, very long supply chain. And at every point in that chain, you need everyone to be lined up of we're going to make this happen. It only takes someone to do nothing to revert to business as usual of, we will not use this new creative different thing that has all of these potential benefits. We will just use what we've used for the last 20 years to derail it, as it were.
So through your work, you've supported things like knowledge transfer partnerships, innovation exchanges. There seems to be a lot of sort of help and guidance out there. What models, though, do you think best suit the needs of the built environment?
It very much varies at what point that intervention is going in. Different products, as it were, fit different stages. I think within that piece, you've got the collaborative research and development, your traditional Innovate UK funding call, like the Transforming Construction, which brings together a conglomeration or a consortia who bid and then work together over 12 months, 24 months with a large dollop of funding to make something happen. That is a great mechanism, but can be hard to align in terms of time and need. The knowledge transfer partnership, and please, I'd be happy to discuss these topics with anyone because it's a whole bunch of terminology, and I'm at risk of falling into acronym land. But knowledge transfer partnership, that funds a company wanting to bring in to develop an innovation to employ usually a post-research individual, could be a graduate, could be a postdoc, supported by an academic centre or an RTO to work specifically on a project for 12 months, 24 months, to transfer that knowledge from the RTO directly into the business. I think it's about 75% of instances that person then becomes full-time employed by the business because they're so valuable. But that relates more to the more research end, I would say. Innovation exchange, I get very involved in these. We've had some great ones. Innovation exchange primarily works with a large organisation, so major tier one, for example, or major client body, who've perhaps got a challenge that they can't solve with their normal supply chain, with their business as usual, their usual mindset, and have perhaps tried things with supply chain and have got nowhere. We did a great one with Vinci, well, Ringway as part of Vinci, who wanted to find viable alternatives to using glyphosate for weed killing, which is a particularly thorny problem. And we were able to use the innovation exchange to distill that challenge down to what they specifically needed with the nuances of working in the built environment, which is very different to a heaving great field. And we did a lot of outreach through Innovation Exchange, found some potential solutions, worked through them with Vinci, and I think they've trialled 6 or 7 now in Hounslow, and are hopefully going to adopt at least 1, possibly 2 of them, and put some support in the others. It's been, when we started it, I thought, crumbs, this is going to be hard. Agriculture can't solve this.
Quite a niche as well, isn't it?
So that is typical of the Innovation Exchange, that very, very nuanced problem that's very, very difficult, and then leveraging our huge network to find solutions. It's really satisfying as well.
Yeah, because you're seeing a tangible outcome.
Absolutely. It's a great, if you look at it from UK PLC, money's been put into research and then into innovators to develop technologies. And by putting that final piece in of, actually our turnover's gone from next to nothing to millions, suddenly the return on investment is phenomenal. And it's solving real world problems.
So a lot of our listeners are the SME community, and especially the innovators. If they're listening to this, how do they get involved? If they're not involved with Innovate UK, obviously they should be.
Yeah.
What's that path look like, or that journey into reaching out and getting involved in things
part
like
of
this?
it is knowing that we exist and we can do this. I think is part of it. And what I would say is go to our website, find the relevant sector page. There'll be contact us on there.
Right.
We try to make ourselves easily contactable. For anyone in the built environment community, I'm happy to take direct outreach through email or LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Talk to us. We like to talk to people.
I think there's a lot of, especially these innovators, that are looking to scale or scale up as well. What tips or what advice would you give maybe to those?
One of the great things we've got, we work very, very closely with one of the other tiers of Innovate UK, which is called Innovate UK Business Growth.
Okay.
Business Growth have a different role to ours. I work from PLCs down to startups and all points in between. Business Growth have a specific remit of working with high growth, innovative SMEs, and they invest into that SME with expert knowledge. They help with bid writing. They can subsidize certain overseas travel to build markets, and they work with us to bring that sector expertise in and the sector connections. So Business Growth are a key partner in that.
Amazing. And I'd like to now sort of touch on maybe the actual side of the business that you work particularly, and that you're an expert on. And I'm gonna have to get this right because it's called SBEN. And I'm gonna get we talk about acronyms. I'm gonna get this right. So it's Emergent Sustainable Built Environment Materials.
Yes.
Give us an overview of what that is.
Well, I felt so smug when we came up with that acronym, and it's been the bane of my life thereafter. So SBEM, which does roll off the tongue, this was an innovation network, which is one of our internal terms. I've described my sort of day role of these different conversations with different parts of the supply chain. The bandwidth is kind of limited by humans for that. So often when we see there is a need within part of a sector for an intervention, we will take the initiative. We did something similar with the wool industry a few years ago. Wool is in the UK is, I think farmers pay to get rid of it, which is shocking. So we set up a wool innovation network to find use cases for wool and build supply chains and build those connections. With SBEM, we'd undertaken a little bit of landscape study of the UK supply chain of these low environmental impact materials in the built environment. So particularly the bio-based materials that we see a lot of at Futurebuild.
Yes, absolutely.
And it was interesting, when we landscaped it, you find that actually a lot of those products are not necessarily UK manufactured, which kind of begs the sort of question of, we're using a low environmental impact material that we're shipping from far away. Is that right? Takes us into that separate podcast on what is sustainability. So we saw this market need for pulling together that UK supply chain and helping them make the connections, helping them grow, and really building that UK supply chain, particularly with that remit of, if you're valorising a waste material that's arising in my home county, Devon, it ought to be used within the southwest. It feels wrong to make something in Devon and then ship it to Newcastle or something. So how can we start to build those regional, place-based, if you like, initiatives?
It's weird, isn't it? Because we've got this trend now with restaurants that it's all about eating local, and I went to an amazing restaurant a couple of weeks ago where they had a menu which was 7 courses all within 7 miles. And we sort of get that concept. But you're absolutely right. We need to start taking that approach to our construction materials and the materials we're building our homes from, because that's how it was done traditionally. That's why we have, geographic differences in how our houses look, for example.
Yeah, and we've kind of lost that with the globalization of supply chains.
Yeah.
I guess the downside is that may bring an additional cost with it. That there's a beauty of having a factory that makes plasterboard that is measured in hectares. You get massive economies of scale, which is hard to reproduce on a place-based model. But I find that distributed manufacturing model interesting and compelling. And I've got a number of, like the companies making earth blocks, very, very transportable model. There's SMEs who can take different kinds of mineral waste and process it in a package factory into roof tiles, for instance. Very, very compelling models, let alone those processing the vast amount of plastic that we can't recycle.
Let's touch on maybe some of the, and I think they're very exciting, but some of the really interesting material innovations that are coming out of your program. I'd love to hear about some of the.
How long have we got?
We've got as long as you need, because I think it's fascinating.
I must say, I enjoy my job so much, and every day's a school day with finding something new that's occurring. One of the eye-openers for me has been very much a traditional material, stone. And you don't think about these things. When you look at a stone quarry for granite work surfaces, a large proportion of the stone isn't suitable for work surfaces and has no home. It's even got a name. They call it orphan stone. So there's an SME working with a major consulting engineer. I think they've got a demonstration at the Design Museum in London at the moment. But they take that orphan stone, which is not aesthetically wonderful. They CNC block it down. They've got a jointing technique, and they can build plausible equivalents to reinforced concrete beams by a joining technique and pre-stressing. They can make slabs, they can make columns, beams, all of your structural components at a very, very low carbon footprint. And I think they're taking that technology, as well as using stone, they can use, shall we say, second-hand concrete. So you're taking a concrete building apart, rather than crushing that concrete down, they can take blocks of it and use the similar joining technology. That's a bit lower in maturity. So I love that kind of technology because it's taking something which is undervalued and maximizing the value of it.
I think the resurgence of structural stone is a really fascinating area, and you'll be pleased to hear I've got 2 podcasts coming up on focusing on stone in the coming months. So it's a massive growing trend, and I think you're right. I think when you look beyond the aesthetics of the sort of clean side, there's so much you can do with structural stone, and it's being used. There's another demonstrator at the moment in Earls Court as well that looks at that as well. So
So aside from that end of it, there's some really interesting things that cross my desk around grown materials. So very early stage, but using cyanobacteria as a binder to make a translucent insulation material, which is phenomenal. It's a little bit of a, now we've made it, what do we do with it kind of material.
So just a little bit more, because we've all, I was going to ask you about mycelium. If you went back a couple of years, everyone was talking about mycelium and that side. So is that an advancement of that? Or was that a completely different
entirely
material?
Different. Mycelium is it's fungi. Cyanobacteria is one of the fundamental bacteria present on the planet, and they've refined it and developing technologies with it. There's mycelium yeah, that is now establishing the marketplace. We did. I talked about the innovation exchange. We ran one for a heat pump manufacturer some years back now, that were really unhappy that they were producing this sustainable energy heating product and then shipping it out in a whole load of polystyrene and plastic and all the other stuff.
Yeah.
So we helped facilitate a collaboration with a mycelium processor who now makes mycelium packaging for the heat pumps.
Oh, wow.
So that is becoming the norm.
Yeah.
I think as a permanent material in construction, it's got a little way to go.
Yeah.
But there are activities around that.
So just staying on the sort of the grown theme, there's been a lot of talk about hemp and hemp insulation. What's the sort of the latest on that?
Yeah, there's commercially available product now, which is getting definite traction. The hemp supply chain has been a little bit difficult to navigate because for a farmer to grow hemp, they have to go through a whole licensing process.
Oh, right, okay.
Because it's
THC
potentially CBD containing. In actual fact, the hemp used in that has no CBD content. That is starting to open up. And there's a lot of activity on many waste stream agricultural fibres. I mean, straw is the oldest and is seeing a good amount of use, and also a lot of more advanced use, processing the straw so it's more into a rigid batt than something which is difficult to process. We're also starting to see interest in miscanthus, which is a rapid growing grass, which is, it's one of those interesting crops. A lot of miscanthus has been planted by UK agriculture in response to the need for biomass for energy generation. And they've then been sitting with huge amounts of miscanthus when Drax went over to using timber pellets. But miscanthus is a really useful fibre. Also, it's a very useful crop. It doesn't require fertilisation. It helps the ground improve. I'm straying into agriculture, which I know very little about, but it's generally a positive crop. So there are companies now processing miscanthus as a fibre for, instead of hemp, in a hempcrete block, which is interesting to see, and potentially that could have properties or value for an insulation. And again, it ties in with that location-based approach where hemp may not be so suitable. Perhaps miscanthus is.
And hemp's quite hard to process, isn't it? The machinery involved is it's a very industrial process in essence, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I think all of the processing is complex to some degree, and you do need to industrialize it. And ultimately, we are talking about construction, so it's not person with a scythe in the field and so on and so forth.
Everyone. You mentioned it earlier as well. We see a huge amount of demand and interest in bio-based materials, especially at Futurebuild. We have huge amounts of it covered on the content sessions. But being frank, we struggle to get it on the exhibition floor, and I think there's a struggle from the manufacturers to scale as well. What are you seeing as sort of the main barriers to really scaling this in the UK?
Yeah, it's a similar barrier to a lot of product and material innovation. It's not necessarily specific to bio-based materials, in that there's a perceived risk of using it across the supply chain. So again, it's that informed, engaged customer, specifier, contractor who are wanting to see it, rather than we'll default to PIR because we can nip down the road and get it, and we know exactly what we're doing. So there's a lot of perception issues there with using it. But I think for the manufacturers, that scale-up process is difficult to fund. there's funding interventions that can come in from angel investors at early stage, Innovate grants, so on and so forth. But one of the difficult pieces, and this has come out through the workshops we've done within ESBEM, is for that quintessential small SME. Certification is expensive, and to get certification that's valuable, you need a production line. So you need an assured production, get it certified into market. They can't necessarily get investment for the certification process, and investment can be difficult to source to put in that £2 million production line without the certification that demonstrates the market. So it's very much chicken and egg, and that's really difficult to unpick.
Because there doesn't seem to be, I spend a lot of time talking to heads of sustainability and architectural practices, and there seems to be the demand there from that specifier community. But maybe, do you feel it's the risk is then being obviously carried by the contractor, and that's maybe where it breaks down a little bit?
Yeah, the contractor risk, if something's specified, the risk sits with the specifier. But from the contractor's point of view, if it's specified that you will use this biopolymer mystery thing, the contractor will look at his supply chain and say, hang on, there's one company does this. Their turnover is 200k. What is the commercial risk to my project with working with them? And it's going to be high. Whereas if they're working with one of those itinerant materials, then the commercial risk is incredibly low, because if they can't get the plasterboard from there, they can get the plasterboard from there. So there's a huge commercial risk there. There's a perceived technical risk as well, of a lot of these materials require to be handled differently on site. It's not necessarily more onerous, but it's different. Particularly from maybe protection from the weather during the exposed stage. Equally, some of them can be a lot more benign to work with. You can cut them with a handsaw and don't have to worry about the dust and the risings and so on. But the contractor, I think, because of what they're doing, tends to focus on what's going to trip me up, what's going to cause me a problem.
I think there's a tendency, isn't there, sometimes, I think, especially with biomaterials, to lump them in with traditional building materials, which then is a sort of an artisan sort of world of sort of install and highly skilled. You sort of think back, especially when you think back to straw, you think of thatched roofs and the sort of the sort of, or hob construction as well. But there is a huge amount of work, and what I find fascinating, of almost modernizing those materials into quite technical and innovative sort of ways of using them. I'd love to sort of probe into some of those, maybe.
And it's jogged my mind, some feedback from an architect who I speak to fairly regularly. He said, what we need are products that perform equal or better, are available, meet the specifications the same, and it's a direct slot in. Rather than we need to do this, we need to do that, it gets too complicated. So as the industry develops to these materials, so like the straw, it's now being processed as bats. And I think the hemp insulation as well is available as a sort of more rigidized bat, rather than having to work with quilted mats and loose fibers. It makes it that much easier. And there's a piece there about education and learning. And certainly there's a lot of CPD available on that. But as to whether the CPD is picked up perhaps by the site worker, I don't know.
And I think we've seen a lot of innovation almost in moving some of those traditional building products into almost SIP panels as well. And that's where I've personally seen some of the innovation, is that there's, again, trying to, almost very much modernize it and keep it very simple for contractors to use, so that you can almost bring it in as a cassette in essence.
I do like that systems approach, and there's a number of players working that way. And then within that SIP panel, it's in their gift in the factory as to how they process those materials and utilize them. So there's huge wins they can have there. And equally, the huge wins on site when you turn up with part completed pieces of structure.
And, it's almost biomaterials. Can it be the saviour of MMC?
Is MMC another podcast?
Maybe, yeah, absolutely. That has its different challenges, but maybe,
It could be. I mean, one of the beautiful things is when you see that actually putting materials which are not just net zero, but are carbon negative. And there's some interesting business models appearing around that, of the building as a carbon sink, as it were, which is fantastic to see.
So let's dive into maybe your vision of the future. Let's sort of fast forward maybe 5 years. What sort of innovation do you feel maybe have the biggest impact in that time? I know I asked you sort of about 26. I'm giving you 5 years, maybe even 10 years. Where do you see the sort of biggest positive impacts coming from?
So around that 5 year plus horizon, those are going to be technologies which are kind of being piloted nowish, really, with the pace of adoption. So I think some of the technologies which are being developed by Environment Agency on their Decarbonisation Technology Accelerator program will stick because they are demonstrating them at scale, and that's really gets the ball rolling. And some of those are sort of groundwater cutoff walls using manipulating soil, decarbonisation of concrete, novel rebars, all manner of different technologies. That will definitely stick. The digital, absolutely. It's unless we run out of energy for data centers, which is a possibility, that growth of AI will just continue. And I think we'll start to see more real world automation on construction in a valid way. In terms of the sustainable materials, mass timber has got so much potential, and mass timber from the UK, which is a subtle difference. It's one of those bits that we miss in the construction sector. Is I think the UK is one of the biggest importer of structural timber in the world because our timber grows so fast. But there's been some great work done by BST in Scotland, and a couple of companies spun up who process Scottish lumber into cross-laminated timber, glulam, and that is getting market traction, which is excellent to see. So that will continue, I think, particularly with the Eurocode 5 enabling fire modelling rather than full-scale testing. Natural insulation, I think, has got to grow and stick. There's a desire to move away from the synthetics. I think there's an increasing recognition that the biomaterials offer more than just lower carbon. They actually perform better in many instances because they attenuate moisture, they have better noise credentials, and quite often perform better thermally. So that is an increasing no-brainer. Concrete as well. We're seeing that move to new concrete mixes with lime extenders. There's a lot of trials coming about with calcined clay. It'd be fantastic to see a calcined clay kiln in the UK so that we can demonstrate UK clays for that. And I think those are the technologies which are really going to stick. I'd love to see more and more of the valorizing of plastic waste and agri-waste and general rubbish and waste occurring. There's a lot of really good technologies appearing on that. But as to how well that will stick over a 5-year horizon is difficult to gauge.
I couldn't agree more. I think the whole reuse and zero waste advancements is going to be key. And I think, touching on there about CLT, there's been an amazing project with UKCLT, which is obviously using, I think it came out of UCL, using, reused timber as well. I think that's a huge. We don't talk about timber waste enough. I think, or the reuse advancements in that. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more with low carbon concrete as well. I think there's been some huge advancements in that, and we're starting to see, those scaling and the production costs coming down. And I think that's the tipping point, isn't it? I think is when you don't pay a premium for a more sustainable or lower carbon product, and I think that's starting to happen on scale.
And there's an interesting piece with sort of the quarry tax aspect as well, with if the clay that you're excavating becomes a feedstock for making something else, whether it's calcined clay, whether it's an earth block, then that starts to address the issues of quarry tax. We've also seen some nice technology that stabilizes excavated soil, not using cement, which comes with a carbon footprint and has a curing time, but really enables uplifting of excavated material into sort of capping layers and things of that nature on site, which again keeps things circular in site.
Yeah. You mentioned there quite a lot of you've touched on some policies that maybe need to change. I think as an industry, we build to code or we build to standards. What do you feel is the sort of major shifts we need in policy or even funding really to accelerate some of this?
I think there's a need collectively to think of more around outcomes. I'm stealing horribly from a presentation that was at I3P only a week back. But when you start to think, what are the outcomes we want? And therefore, what interventions do we need to make? That starts to inform what you do, rather than the more sort of, well, we're building this, so we'll do that kind of approach. And once you start saying, what are the outcomes? You start to think more around the interventions. You start to value things more, because quite often what you do is valued on pound notes and that initial cost, rather than the overall value of the project. Does it enable a local industry to spring up processing this agri-waste? Does it springboard that with all of the social eco value that comes to that region? In terms of policy, it'd be interesting to see what comes out in the Circular Economy for Growth plan, which way that takes construction, because construction is very much name checked in the thinking around that. There's the net zero building standard coming out as well, which is equally focusing on the embodied carbon, viz the sustainability of what we build. So there's some interesting drivers there. I think as to whether it's a policy level or a mindset level, construction is very predicated on thou shalt comply with code, thou shalt use certified materials in a very specific way. It'd be interesting to map how construction has got to that point. And if we look at the heroes of construction from an age gone by, Brunel would have probably left the country when you think about it. It'd be good to see mechanisms whereby innovators can do things, to a degree be allowed to fail or fail successfully. I think is the important piece. As to what that looks like in terms of legislation in what is clearly difficult times financially is much harder to put down.
We've talked a lot about maybe localized innovation, and I think what's clear and what you'll see at Futurebuild this year actually is the sort of much more engagement with local authorities, as a key client. And I'm wondering if we're doing enough to involve local authorities, in innovation specification.
There's a lot of them. I think is part of part of the challenge, that the mayoral authorities tend to innovate, quite often around social housing and housing retrofit. But as you drill down into the smaller LAs, then it becomes more difficult. I think they've all got this landscape of probably not enough money to go around, which is a real problem area. It'd be good to see how you can aggregate that need. I've seen it with the local council road innovation group, LCRIG, who do sort of aggregate that need to a degree, and equally aggregate the spin out of novel technologies that they're seeing. So that is quite a nice showcase. Within Business Connect, we have a team that specifically works with local authorities on a place-based basis. And it's worth the supply chain checking out. We do have an innovation network operating in that area, and specifically we're running a directory to help local authority procurement find those innovative technologies, albeit probably at a high market readiness, that they can buy. Local authority procurement is, again, they're short of resource. And when you're short of resource, you go to what worked okay last time.
No, I can't thank you enough for your time today. I think we probably planned out about 5 or 6 different podcasts that we could spin off of today's conversation. I almost want to finish just with sort of 2 more questions, and the first is really, it's quite a big one. So, what would be your one message for construction leaders, about innovation that they want to take away maybe from today's podcast?
When you look at where innovation has really, really worked, you look at projects like Tideway, you look at HS2, which are major, they're mega projects, and they can bake in innovation through that. They can bring on innovators, take them through the journey, deploy, learn, and bring them on. That works fine on a mega project, but there's only so many mega projects going around, and you don't tend to get mega projects in buildings. So how can those industry leaders, whether it's client groups or contractor groups, how can they agglomerate with this common need to enable innovation to be rolled out, be trialed, and learn from it?
And then, just finally, what's the key takeaway today? How do you want people listening to this to really come and engage with SBEN and UK Business Connect?
That's the easiest question. Please get in touch. Happy for my contact details to be posted with the webinar. No, please have a dialogue with us. Talking with everyone across the supply chain is vital for us to understand who's doing what, where we can make those valid connections, where there are particular challenges that we might be able to solve simply by connecting in an organization that's already solved it. So please talk to us. There's a web landing page as well on the Innovate UK Business Connect website that should be pretty findable. Again, put a link.
Yeah, absolutely. Neil, I can't thank you enough for your time, and it's an absolute pleasure for me, and Futurebuild to just help in any way we can support innovation, and we can't thank you enough for your time today.
That's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.